and welcome to my tennis coaching. As always, we are streaming on Spotify and YouTube. Please, before we get into today's podcast, do me a huge favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. So today we're going to discuss practice design and how I design my crazy practices. This is quite a common question I get from people over on Instagram at my tennis coaching. Steve, how do you design these ecological dynamics based practices? They're a little bit crazy. And from the outside, they are a little bit crazy. If you look at my practices, they are not traditional tennis drills. They're not isolated. It's not focused on technique. But what they look like is tennis. A few weeks back, I released a video about I don't just play games. So for what I do today is give an insight to, okay, what my games are, how I design them, and what's the theory and the logic behind them. And hopefully this gives you a bit of an insight and a little bit look behind the curtain. So the first thing I always start with is, what's my intention? What would I like the player to explore today? And sometimes the players tell me what they would like to explore, but everything has a very clear intention. And that intention may be probably based on previous experience, how the players performed in a recent tournament, how they performed in recent sessions. It may be just feedback from the player themselves based on how they feel they've performed in either a match play or practice environment. But it always has a clear intention. So let's give an example. If a player's been competing recently and every time it gets tight in terms of the score, 5-5 in a tiebreak, 30-all, the player gets quite passive. They get quite tight. Again, something we've discussed quite a lot on this channel, the fear of losing. The player hits the ball down the middle. They back off the racket head speed and they're just hoping that their opponent misses. So my intention could be quite simply, I want them to be a bit more positive in their play. So in those close, tight moments, can they see opportunities to win? It's interesting because when players get nervous or anxious, the field of perception will narrow. They may not see all the options available. So I want them to be able to see more options under pressure, under challenge. So that might be my clear intention. I have just literally today released a practice design on this topic within my Instagram channel. The channel is free. If you head over to my tennis coaching over on Instagram, go to my profile page, join the channel, you'll see the game called Kryptonite, in which I want players to exploit weaknesses. So within the practice itself, I also have some criteria that I want the game to present to the player. Number one, the game has to present the player with lots of information. The player needs to use information to help them make decisions. This is the perception part of this perception action coupling. What information do I want the player to process? Things like opponent's position, the player's position, the ball characteristics. Information is really, really key for the player. Now, I want this information to be variable. I don't want to give the player the information. I want to see, can they see it? Can they scan for it? Can they process it? Therefore, the game has to be quite open. Again, this is why I don't basket feed or isolate. When you basket feed or isolate, it gives the information to the player. They just become lazy. They know where the ball's coming from. They know what it's going to look like. They know what type of shot they're going to hit. That's why it doesn't transfer very well into training. So I want the game to give the player lots of information. I want to improve their ability to scan the court, take in the information. The second thing I want is variability. I want lots of different influences on the player. Things have to change. During the course of a tennis match, things change all the time. The score changes. When the score changes, that changes behavior. And that behavior then impacts how we play. For example, if I'm 30 love up, I'm going to play differently if I'm love 30 down. If I'm 5 love up, I'm going to play differently if I'm love 5 down. So I want to put the player in different stages of challenge. Can they play at their best when they're 5 love up? Can they still play at their best when they're 5 love down? Their opponent will change as well. So I don't want to isolate a drill. For example, hit the ball to the backhand to find the weakness. But their opponent can change as well. So I don't want to isolate the drill and just say, okay, short ball, hit the ball to the backhand, play the point out. Because if you keep hitting the ball to my backhand, it's going to improve. So I want lots of variability in there, lots of different influences as well. Within that as well, I want the player to have multiple different ways to play the game. The player has to use the information, both like we said, opponent's position, their position, ball characteristics, the influence, the score, how their opponent's playing, and they can find different ways to play. So, for example, if the player is looking to exploit the backhand, can they maybe hit a high topspin shot into my backhand and push me back behind the baseline? Can they maybe slice the ball through, get the ball to skid through onto my backhand? Can they give me a backhand short ball, which in my case probably catch me out more often than not. My short ball backhand is horrendous. I keep saying that and giving the game away here. So I want the player to find multiple different ways. So again, goes back to the short ball onto your forehand into my backhand. You're only giving the player one option. So I want the player to have multiple different ways in which they can play. I want the game then to present lots of different decisions. The player has to use the information, the influence. They have to find the multiple different ways, and they've then got to make decisions. So if I am going to go into the backhand, how am I going to do it? What am I going to do after I go into the backhand? By presenting the game to the player is finding multiple different ways to win the game. The last thing I want the player to explore is movement solutions. So again, this goes back to the whole thing, I don't teach technique. I don't teach technique. I teach players how to find movement solutions within the game. So again, for example, if the player is going deep into my backhand with a heavy topspin shot, they're going to have to find a way of generating a topspin on the ball with their movement, with their technique. And if they can't do it, they're going to have to find a way in which they can do it. And they're going to explore different paths, different speeds, different angles of the racket, hitting the ball from different positions, hitting the ball from different stances until they find a way. I'm not just teaching my players one way to play a game. I'm teaching the players multiple different ways. And that's how I set up my practice designs. And as you can see, it's very representative. It looks and feels like tennis. I'm giving the players multiple solutions that they have to find themselves. I'm giving the players multiple problems and they've got to find multiple solutions. And the idea is when they go onto a match court, they are now a much more complete tennis player. Yes, I'm not teaching explicit technique, but as you can see, I'm probably giving the players multiple skills. I'm probably teaching the player more in a single session than most coaches are in 6 weeks. If you are interested in how I design my practices and actually seeing real clips of me coach real players in real time, head over to mytenniscoaching.com, head over to the Coach Mastery Hub and look at My Tennis Coach Academy. My Tennis Coach Academy is my membership area of the website. It's my coach education hub. You'll find webinars, courses, downloads, and so much more to help you produce more and better players. And that's what we all want as tennis coaches. As always, stick around and listen to another podcast or watch another video. And until then, I'll see you soon.